Something.
Dane?
All right. Well, hello, boys and girls, and welcome to Inside Movies Galore. I am the temporary host, Dane Kyle, because David Streggy is here, but he's not feeling too well. So I'm trying to guide the discussion for tonight. And it just so happens that tonight's film is one of my all time favorites, Paul Thomas Anderson's Punch Drunk Love, starring Adam Sandler, Emily Watson, and Philip Seymour Hoffman, the late great Philip Seymour Hoffman. Um, and it's one of my all-time favorites, and I'll expound on that in a minute. But just to open it up, well, I know David's going to be here, mostly listening, just because he's not feeling too well. If he wants to chat, I would normally probably give it to him, but he's not feeling too well. So if David, if
I
you
can
want to chime,
speak if you really want me to.
yeah. Well, if you
Anyone
want
really
to
wants
chime
me
in,
to.
if you want to chime in at any point, go ahead.
Well, why
Okay.
don't I start by war? See, I I know that at first this movie did not do well at the box office, from what I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I picked it up for $3 at Big Lots. I don't know if anyone knows what that is. But it's a store that you often find like price down merchandise sold for like $6 to $3 or whatnot. So I picked up the 2 disc, I think five, and I tried it out, and I watched it for the first time maybe 3 years ago myself. So, well, Adam Sandler, he's got kind of a nasally voice all the time. He speaks through his nose a lot. So that's the one thing that you got to realize. But in this film, it kind of reminded me of his performance in The Water Boy because
Mm.
he had that nervous, you know, mentality about him, and it was
Mm-hmm.
almost mental in a way.
Well, funny you say that. So, just a little background info on the film for those listening. So, Paul Thomas Anderson had just come off of Boogie Nights and Magnolia, which were 2 hours and 40 minutes and 3 hours, respectively. Like these big, giant ensemble casts, huge, sprawling story, interconnected, all that stuff. And so then with Punch Drunk Love, he makes this hour and a half, kind of small, contained movie that nonetheless has a lot of stuff going on in it. It's very tight and compact, and it's the storytelling. And I think he himself even described this as kind of an art house Adam Sandler film. And if you look at the structure of the story, it definitely hits a lot of the Adam Sandler movie
Didn't this
tropes, and yet it doesn't feel like conventional Sandler material.
Do
It
you know
feels like
whether
its
this
own unique thing.
I know.
Hard to track down.
What'd you say, David?
uh didn't this come out around the same time as that Renee Zellweger and Ewan McGregor film Down with Love?
That was 2001, and
Okay,
that was directed by Peyton Reed.
okay, because
Um,
that's another movie that kind of reminded me
mhm.
of the trailer when I first saw the trailer for this film.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. This came out in the same year as Mr. Deeds, which was a more conventional Adam Sandler film, and it won Adam Sandler a lot of acclaim with the critics, but it did not do well at the box office, which was a rarity for Adam Sandler, and because he was regularly a box office draw. But it also was, pretty risky of him, and it one of the big reasons I love it is that it shows his the fact that he really is a amazing actor. He just doesn't service his talent as often as he could, but when he needs to act dramatically, he can really, really do a great job. And it's I don't want to hog it too much because I'll have my chance, but we can go around and let's see what Red Raven thought.
I really liked it. I thought it was really good. I really related to his character.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I struggle with mental illness and I have anxiety and depression, and I'm not very open about it. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not something I talk about very often, but in the movie, you could tell that he had some kind of anxiety or bipolar disorder or something that was wrong with him. And so you could tell that he had like a mental illness. And so I really related to his character. And for that reason, I just really fell in love with this movie.
Yeah. Well, I know the feeling because I that's it. I know that kind those kind of struggles as well as one of the things that really attracted me to it. I really love everything about it, but one of the things that I could relate to, I saw a lot of myself in the character of Barry Egan. Like I related to him a lot. Um, I've had a lot of similar experiences with family members that are trying to help you, presumably, but the way that they're helping you is hurting you much more than it ever is helping you. I understand his loneliness, his deep desire to be loved, his social awkwardness, anxiety. His desire for connection and going about it sometimes in the wrong ways. The fact that he does meet the love of his life in very unusual circumstances, and through the power of that love, he's able to find courage and find meaning and find strength and that sort of thing. Um, and that I can relate to all of those things. So I really felt like he got to the heart of what that feels like, what it feels like to have people that are supposed to love you bully you, and how hard it is to break out of that cycle. Um, but that's again, I'll pepper my little bits throughout. But let's go to Katie and see what she thought.
Well, I enjoyed the movie as well, and it's interesting hearing you guys talk about relating to Adam Sandler's character Barry and kind of what you thought about him. I related to him in a completely different way,
Mm-hmm.
in that I saw him as an autistic man, a very high
Yeah.
functioning autistic man, much like my youngest brother. And
Mm-hmm.
I saw a lot of similarities in his behavior, his ability to keep it together, and then all of a sudden lose his shit. My
Mm-hmm.
brother is kind
Yeah.
of famous for that. And this was a much more organized portrait of that high functioning autism that I recognized. But I saw a lot of those similarities, and then so I could relate to the female lead character, not in loving in a romantic sense, but I can just relate to loving a person with character traits like that.
Mm-hmm.
My brother is very, very much like that. There's just eerie similarities in it. Like I
Yeah.
say, the character in the movie was definitely more organized and um, like a neater package of those things. Like I think it's, at least in my experience with um, somebody who is high functioning autistic, there's a little bit more nuance to some of that. But overall, that was exactly like what I thought immediately. As soon as he read his credit card off without having to look at the number, like knew it by heart, like
Mm-hmm.
I connected to that. And they don't actually say what his deal is, but it
Nor
felt
is it
very much
necessary to do that because his story
sure.
works no matter what. Which actually funny you say that because it had been brought to my attention, which I've never been. No one has ever formally tested me for anything, but someone said to me not too long ago that she thought that I had high functioning Asperger's syndrome, which
Which is funny. It's
mhm.
not
Yeah,
even
I've
called.
been told that too as well.
Well, which is actually put as has been put as a form of autism. It's been put on the autism
Sure.
spectrum like lately.
That's
And
basically
so,
what my brother
yeah.
has.
Well, and it's
More or
funny
less.
because I never thought of myself as that, and then watching the film again through that lens, it it was interesting to see because he clearly has some symptoms of what I've understand it to be, as far as like you said, reading off the credit card number without having to look at it, as well as like his obsession with the pudding and being able to look at the minute details like that, and outbursts of anger and having trouble with some emotional intelligence, emotional reasoning, that kind of stuff. I never quite looked at it through that lens, but it makes a lot of sense, and that's something that I'll have to research more on my own. But
Well,
yeah, that's what that person had said to me, and I'll have to see for my own self if that's true.
and I at one point in time went to school down in uh, Illinois, and there was another young man who had a similar disability, except his was more extreme, and he could be two levels down and hear a conversation two levels up, and then burst out with part of the conversation that he heard 2 days later. So
Yeah.
My brother's really good at remembering your license plate number. He knows everybody's license plate number. If he's met you, he's asked you about your license plate number, or he's seen your car, he will remember it.
I've
every
I've been told that as well. Like not for that thing, but like for I have like an extremely good memory for certain kinds of things, and then other kinds of things it's difficult. Especially when it comes to like details of a person, or lines from a movie when something came out, or just things like that. I have a really really strong memory, and then other times I have trouble remembering certain people's names and things like that, unless I work at it. But it's, again, I never really looked at it through that lens, because I don't know, it's just a matter of just educating oneself about.
Well, I think we're all on some sort of a gradient in
Mhm.
terms of mental health diagnoses. I've been diagnosed as ADHD, and
Mhm.
that's it's like whatever. It's just a little different on the spectrum of things that you can have. I think we all sort of fall somewhere.
Mhm.
But I thought this character really, Barry, kind of rid that line between, like, yeah, I could see this guy just sort of being, me, or some, representing things that I might do, but then also he looks a little strange or a little not quite,
Mhm.
up to par for some reason. So I think he kind of straddles that line a little bit
Well,
with.
one thing to throw out there is that Barry Egan struck me as someone who is very high functioning, regardless of if if he has Asperger's syndrome, or is autistic, or is just depressed or anxious, or whatever he is, doesn't matter.
well,
But he struck me as somebody who, no matter what, has very strong emotions, very strong human emotions, but does not, at least at present, does not seem to have that great of self awareness or introspection. Because I think a
Yeah, he
lot of
doesn't know
that,
what to do about it. He doesn't know
yeah,
what to
because
do about it.
he knows, he feels very deeply and
I know.
Yes.
strongly, but it's just a matter of not knowing how to process it and how
Yeah.
to communicate it to himself.
And that's
But
very familiar. Like I say, growing up with an autistic brother, like
Mhm.
I saw him struggle with that. He still struggles with that. He's 24 years old, and he still um, struggles to pick up on the social cues and the nuances, and the,
Mhm.
kind of knowing the right things to say. Like,
Mhm.
So
there was so
the,
much of that in this movie that I just was just like, oh, my heart melted immediately, because I'm like, I get it. I
Yeah.
know what this guy is trying to do and what he
Mhm.
struggles to do, and just how it kind of all and like the way his family treats him is just like heartbreaking, because
I
oh
know. Well,
yeah.
and I can relate to that as well. I mean, just like mostly, I could relate mostly to how his, like, the primary sister that we get to know, like how she treats him, because she does try to help get him out from his shell. But the way that she does it is really in your face, really forceful, really
Insulting.
insulting,
Oh, yeah.
really just awful.
All
And
seven of them calling him at work.
mhm,
You gonna get
Oh,
the
about
party?
that party.
yeah, but like I can relate to more so to like someone who is trying to help you and is a family member, but just does it in like a really destructive way. Not I mean, I've had a little bit of like people outright saying mean things or like outright insulting me and things like that, but I can really relate to like family members trying to help you and not doing it right.
Well,
But
and what
that's
it
not.
looks like to me is like there's a difference between looking at a person as a person and then looking at them as, a diagnosis or something weird.
Mhm,
Like they clearly thought their brother was strange. Like, why do you
mhm,
do that? Why did you have the hammer? Like, why were you? It's like, why are you so entitled that you feel like you need to know everything about this guy? Like, it really set the
mhm.
stage for the way they saw him and
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 I
Why,
know how
why are
that
you wearing
disrespectful
that
it was.
suit?
and I know how
Right.
that feels where like every little action that you take or don't take gets microanalyzed like crazy and you're kind of viewed under the microscope constantly for just trying to live your own life. I
It's a
know that.
really interesting dynamic to showcase in a
Mhm.
movie. Like, I
Well,
think a lot could be done with that.
it's an important one because it's something that not a lot of movies talk about. Before we go too much further, let's see if Dustin concurs or has anything else different to throw in there.
Uh, I
Because
hadn't.
we're just talking
Well,
about character stuff. We're not even talking about filmmaking yet. But we'll get.
well, when I saw it, I didn't actually get the mental illness angle until you guys started explaining it, and I was like, oh. Because I watched it and I was like, have they just been following? Were they following me around like the past couple of weeks? Because I saw a ton of myself, like an upsetting amount of myself in. I think
Yeah.
I did not think
Not
he was
trying to
capable.
armchair diagnose anybody
so
over
did
here,
you?
FYI.
So
I did
Dustin,
not think he was capable of being a character like that. I was
did you
really surprised.
Well,
did you
that's
relate to
why
this
that's
movie
why
more
I'm
than you thought you would?
Yeah, I did. I couldn't really figure out what the hell was going on, because it was just kind of his life and
yeah.
the directions he goes with things. It's like, oh, I want to
Well,
do this. Oh, we're gonna do that. It's like, oh,
that's one of the
kind of,
things I love the most about it is that
I'm
it.
kind of barely holding this together.
Yeah. Well, one
Oh,
of the things I love the most about it is that it doesn't like it's really tight, compact storytelling, and the script works really well, and yet it doesn't follow the conventions of here's your log line, here's how to quickly sum up the movie, here's the genres it conveniently falls into, all that stuff. It really doesn't follow that at all. It just is what it is, and it's funny, it's dramatic, it's tragic, it's sweet and uplifting, it's romantic, it's disturbing, it's got all these different emotions, which I absolutely love. And like you were saying, you didn't know he was capable of that kind of acting. Well, I think that was one of the big things that I loved about it. And then ever since then, I've been an Adam Sandler fan because I know what he can do. And like he was really good in Reign Over Me, and even if you've watched like his other comedies leading up to Punch Drunk Love, you see some of the makings of Barry Egan in those other characters. Like you see some of the shared characteristics they have, and like the person who is really bottled up, who has been mistreated by people, who has outbursts, and is able to somehow get a hold over his life because he isn't bottling up his feelings anymore. Like you see that all over his movies, and it just so happened that Paul Thomas Anderson took that basic premise and was able to mold it into a really, really a unique and I think really wonderful film. But you were saying that you saw a lot of yourself in the character.
yeah, I really did. Like how he would have just kind of these miniature freakouts, like when something wasn't going well or when something would frustrate him. Like he would just suddenly get really aggressive about it. Or like the thing with the piano where he just I don't even know why. I'm not even sure why the hell he had the piano. It was just like he found it and it was cool or something.
Well, there's
Like,
actually a very clear
he just
reason for that. So one of the big themes of the film, and this is a way to transition into the filmmaking side of it, is that one of the big themes of the film comes through the music, because you hear very definite musical motifs all throughout. And the music is incredible, by the way, by John Bryan. It's very avant-garde, very weird, but amazing. Um, and so music plays a big theme, but even more than that is harmony, the idea of harmony. And actually, Paul Thomas Anderson confirmed that in Charlie Rose interview that he and Adam Sandler did, is the idea of trying to find one's own harmony, the own harmony in one's life, which is interesting because so he finds out of an extraordinary event, he meets the woman who's going to become the love of his life. Through another extraordinary event, he finds the harmonium on the side of the road. It's broken, just like him, and he repairs it and gradually is able to play it. And, he kind of comes back to it in moments of crisis and is able to play it a little bit better each time. And, eventually, once he's found harmony in his life with the love of his life and has courage and has, you know, can become more of a complete person who's able to handle emotions, he's able to play it, and it just speaks to that theme, which I thought was really cool. As one thing I wanted, yeah, well, one thing I wanted to ask Katie was about the colors. That's one of my favorite things about the film is how
it had those weird blurs from time to time.
But also how really clear the color symbolism was. Like it was very consistent and it kind of created its own color
suit.
Yeah.
Yeah, the blue suit was always kind of I just saw him as this blue guy and this blue.
Mm-hmm.
What was the suit supposed to symbolize?
Well, actually, there's a really great video I'd love to point everyone to, which was about. I can send it to each of one of you, but it basically was a couple different analyses of the film. One of which was talking about the color language of the film. Barry's represented by blue. We see him in the blue suit with the blue tie, and then he meets Lena Leonard, who is in red, and then gradually you see that he has a red tie with his blue suit. So in other words, a part of her is with him now, and you see the color red in a couple different people. Some of it, depending on who's wearing the color, it can either be pointing the way to her, like there's a red arrow when he jumps from the alley, like head first, he jumps. There's a red arrow. The stewardesses of the flight are dressed in that same color red. Lena is often in red. But also, you see other kind of oppositional forces, like one of his sisters and one of their husbands, who's wearing red, or some kind of variation of it, whether it's like a maroonish purple or whatever. But so, in other words, it can point the way to Lena, but it can also be an oppositional force. But so there's that, but you also see the stark whiteness of like his life in the garage, the fact that the backgrounds are often blown out to where there's just a silhouette. So it's kind of representing the lonely person in the void who's trying to find love, trying to find, it's like the male force trying to find the female force, trying to find the opposite, and trying to become one. And so
I noticed they did that with those color orbs in the beginning and ending credit sequence. They had the color orbs coming together.
That's right. Well, that and also the color sequences there, that kind of helps tie the color theme musical motifs, because it's sort of the idea of that the visual it's kind of like the visual representation of music, as well as the fact that those kind of transitions, those take place at very key moments in the story. If anything, they kind of take place in like act breaks, which is kind of a neat structure there. Yeah.
There was a lot more to this movie than I realized when I was watching it.
Oh yeah. Well, we haven't even gotten to one of the other things that I didn't pick up on, because I picked up on that stuff more or less the first time I watched it, but the part I didn't pick up on, which that same video picked up on, was the ties to Superman. And I didn't pick this up at all, but at first, but it makes complete sense. So his costume is blue with a little bit of red in it eventually. His girlfriend is LL, Lena Leonard, or Lois Lane. Lois Lane. He's got a supervillain a villain who has a supervillain name, Mattress Man. He in the first Superman film, and through a lot of Superman lore, Superman has to learn how to be human, has to learn how to deal with very heavy emotions, and that's a big theme in the first Superman film, which Barry has to as well. And when he and Lena are together at the final shot, she's wrapped around his shoulders like the cape, and she's wearing red. And so, it's the idea of someone learning how to deal with these very heavy emotions, kind of learning how to be human, essentially, which I thought was really neat. And also the fact that, and I didn't even notice this, but right before he breaks the sliding glass door, and right as he makes the final call to his sister when he yells at her, you see the color green right before he breaks the sliding glass doors, and she's wearing green right before he calls her, like kryptonite, which is really neat. I didn't even pick up on that because I picked up on the other color symbolism, but I didn't pick up on that. But I thought that was really kind of neat.
How did you come to the conclusion of the Superman? Again,
how did I?
It sounds like they hit you over the head with it pretty hard.
Well, that was with the video I saw. I didn't pick up on that part, but that was something that I thought was pretty neat, a neat takeaway from it, because there's a lot of odd, interesting parallels. Plus the fact that there's like a constellation called the Seven Sisters, and Barry has seven sisters, and Superman obviously comes from the stars. I don't know how much of that's coincidental, but it's just kind of an interesting parallel. But just a little personal thing. I saw this film for the first time in college, which I didn't mention that part. I saw it for the first time in college, and this was before I met my first girlfriend, and I could relate to it very heavily as far as like the feelings of loneliness and wanting to feel stronger and wanting to be more in control of my life and wanting to feel the kind of strength that love can give you. And
going along those Superman terms, where do you think the story of the hotline attacker comes in line with superhero complex?
Well, it's kind of, I guess, the basic idea that the supervillain has henchmen that are able to get at the hero and his love, which that happens in virtually every superhero story ever, to some degree. And it's the idea that which the Mattress Man is interesting because I picked up more about him this viewing than I did before, because he wants the brothers to go. Well, it's kind of funny. So they're brothers, and Barry has sisters, so maybe that's kind of interesting. But he sends them off on this mission. He doesn't pay them. He pays them a flat rate, doesn't pay for their gas, doesn't pay for anything else. One of them isn't being paid at all. And he's not willing to go there himself to deal with this thing. And so he's obviously a coward, and That's why he calls it off after Barry goes all the way to Provo, Utah, to talk to him. And that's why he's like, "Didn't I warn you?" That's that. That was kind of funny. But it also shows that he is ultimately a coward, and he's just there as a cheap extortion guy. And it's I mean, that's also kind of classical supervillain lore there, as far as the villain not having the guts to go through with a lot of the dirty work himself.
I just realized that they totally foreshadowed his hooking up with Lena when he was calling the phone sex line, and she asked if he had a girlfriend, and he said yeah, she was out of town or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, as far as the fact that she travels a lot, yeah.
Yeah, and then he gets a girlfriend who travels.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that was
Well, also, one of the things I wanted to ask the Red Raven and Katie, I think Katie was saying you related to Lena. I also picked up more about her this time because she is kind of off herself, but her backstory is not as fleshed out, nor does it necessarily need to be because it is Barry's story. But just the facts about her is that she doesn't have a lot of family. She has had relationships. She has even been married. Obviously hasn't worked. And I don't know if Barry's had any relationships prior to her. But
as far as we know,
as far as we know,
as far as we know, we know that she saw a picture of him once and wanted to meet him.
Yeah, so in other words, what I'm trying to get at is that they established that she is possibly a little off herself, or at least off of what one would consider the norm. And they don't really go into that much of a detail about it, but at the same time,
I have something on that.
Yeah.
They sort of did touch on that maybe they were similar in that scene in the hotel when they're talking about like killing each other.
Yeah. Which I thought
like,
that
she
was
goes
actually
right into it, like no hesitation. It's like, oh,
yeah.
all right.
I saw that as awkward pillow talk where they just didn't know what to say.
Or like I remember
that.
when I showed that film to my first girlfriend, she kind of interpreted that as like them having their own little language, and I can see that, and like I know that with Jillian, my girlfriend now, I know that we have a lot of our own language and a lot of our own, like, things that we say to each other that only we would understand, and things like that. So stuff that would not make a lot of sense to anyone else, or would say, "Oh, that sounds really mean," or "That sounds really this or that," and I kind of interpreted it possibly as that, plus the fact that it's channeling Barry's violent impulses into love, and that's sort of, and again, she starts it off, so it's not him initiating it, but it just speaks to the fact that they have that in common, and that they're both a little off themselves, but that they do share.
I would say, if anything, it was like a developing of that language, because I don't think the first time you sleep together you already have the talk.
No,
I think it was like the developing of it.
Does anyone think the whole family was a little off?
In a different way, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they were cruel and mean, but they weren't like him.
They called him little gay boy when he was a kid or something like that.
Yeah. Well, they weren't like him, but they were contributors to the way he was. And that's one thing that I've since researched about Asperger's syndrome, as well as just other and like anxiety, depression, like some of the more common ones. All that stuff. There's a component of genetics to it, but there's also a component of environment as well. And the exact percentage breakdown, I don't think, is quite clear always, like if it skews heavily one way or the other, but I know that environment does play a factor in terms of whether those kinds of feelings or behaviors develop. And in his case, most definitely, his environment helped to shape him in that kind of negative way. And that's why, through the power of loving someone and finding someone that can understand him, that he's able to take what he is, who he is, and is able to find some kind of stability.
Well, the way I saw it is like he, the way his sisters treated him contributed to how he responded to his own feelings. Like he
Mm-hmm.
had no outlets. He said it. He had nobody to talk to
Mm-hmm.
about this kind of stuff. And then when he did confide in someone, that confidence was broken immediately. And it
Yeah.
just, reiterated for him, like, can't trust these people, can't open up to these people. Like he knew he needed some help. He knew he needed to go somewhere with that. So he's self-aware enough. He just doesn't, it's like taking those steps where he needs a guide. And it's interesting because I will always, be that for my brother as he ages.
Mm-hmm.
Like someday when my parents pass away and whatnot, I'll be responsible for just that sort of nuance of care where it's like, he doesn't need me to live with him or anything, but when it comes time to like making some big decisions and having somebody to go to with that kind of stuff, I'm that person. And so even seeing that violation of trust, how he put his trust into his brother-in-law, and that's what he got out of it, it's like
Yeah.
really paints an ugly picture of those people. And it's like, well, no wonder the guy is frustrated like this and doesn't know how to express his anger.
Well, that and I felt really sad. One of the shots that made me feel really sad was when he's calling the phone sex line, and he's not doing it because he's, horny or anything. He just wants someone to talk
He just
to.
wanted to talk to somebody.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and then the shot that just killed me. I mean, it's one big long take, which I love long takes like that with a lot of movement and everything. But the shot that just killed me was when he's sitting down at the table and they pan over and there's this empty seat there that's like made, it's like the table's set, like that's part of the table's set, and there's obviously no one there, and he wants there to be someone there. And I felt like that was, I don't know, that just killed me. I mean,
Yeah,
lot
same.
there were a lot of moments like that that just broke my heart because I knew what that was like. And like, one of the things that I said to Jill was that before she came into my life, that I kind of felt like my apartment was just kind of a place where I could park my carcass basically after the day, and just it just didn't have any life. It didn't have any it didn't feel truly like a home. And then now that she's in my life, it really feels like a home. It has life and it has, energy and all the things that you want your home to be. It has it now. And so I know that feeling from having been on the other side of it.
It was a really heartbreaking, that whole take, like you said, that whole thing was, just the taking advantage of him, and his gullibility in the situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's something as that, something that I have to look at having, any sort of responsibility at any point for my brother's well-being, like making sure he doesn't get sucked into some things like that. Even, I mean, with the internet now, I mean, imagine if this movie was made 10 years later, the
Mm-hmm.
things that Barry could have been getting himself into.
Oh
you know,
yeah,
and,
like
and that,
catfishing and
Oh,
sure.
things like
and
And
that.
those are things that I
these
think
days,
about, with my
these
brother.
days, for doing that kind of thing, you can easily become a sex offender
Mm-hmm.
because of things like that. So,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
and be taken advantage of in that respect, even if even if you do have some kind of mental, disorder or something like that, people won't see
Well,
that
it's
on the
very
Yeah.
outside.
dangerous for people.
It is.
Very dangerous.
Um, any other thoughts about the film? Anything
Not
we haven't covered?
Um,
Because I remember, Dustin, you were saying that you thought it was really strange, but then
does
upon
anyone
hearing
think
these things, did you?
does anyone think that the organ or the accompaniment, the organ, when it was dropped off on the truck, did anyone get the feeling that maybe that might have been dropped off on the truck by um, the Emily Watson's character?
No, it wasn't. It was a
Okay.
You what?
different,
No.
different person. Well, actually, interesting that you bring that up. So, like, I don't know if anybody saw Paul Thomas Anderson's previous film, Magnolia. One of the thing that unifies that film is just the idea that nothing happens by chance, that lives are interconnected, that there are these extraordinary things that can happen that don't necessarily get explained. These kind of one in a million kind of things that are possible, but they just rarely happen. And the opening of this film, I felt, was sort of like bridging the themes of that film with the new themes presented in Punch Drunk Love, and as a result, kind of starting a new artistic period in Paul Thomas Anderson's career. Because in this case, you have just these unusual, extraordinary events that happen that aren't really explained, and yet they incite so much of the story. They really get it going. And I'm okay with it not being explained, because stuff like that, it's not impossible. It could absolutely happen, and stranger things have happened.
Yeah, there are a lot of incredible coincidences that happen every day. So
Absolutely.
not everything. Actually, most things don't have like a special meaning behind them
Yeah.
in reality.
Not
Well,
necessarily
it's all how
anything
you want to
to.
perceive it.
Yeah,
I think it's all a matter of perception.
it is, and to be fair, human beings will never. We are finite three-dimensional beings, and we will never.
And there are
We will.
always those days that
The
just
human,
nothing seems to go right either.
Mhm.
well, the,
You wake up on the wrong side of the bed. All of a sudden, you trip over something. The dog ate your homework. All that kind of jazz.
Mhm.
you
Are we
wake up
saying?
at 7 o'clock and miss your at night and miss your class and everything you were supposed to do today and just feel
Mhm.
terrible, and then see a movie that basically mirrors the experience you've been having for the past 6 months.
What were you just gonna say, Dustin?
I
Because I was saying that human beings are like essentially three-dimensional, finite beings.
I was saying that the human brain is more or less designed for pattern recognition, and
Mhm.
it's so strong that we'll see patterns that aren't there. Like that was speaking
Mhm.
to people like, oh yeah, things happen for a reason. Not really. It just looks like they do. Like a good example would be the face on Mars, if you've ever heard of
Oh
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
We're trained to look for patterns where there aren't necessarily patterns, just because it's what we recognize. But it's more just the idea that because we exist in three dimensions and we have a finite existence, that we cannot get beyond that, and so we will never exist fourth dimensionally, fifth dimensionally. We'll never be able to get outside time or our own lifetimes and things like that. So, if there was like a grander design or some kind of larger pattern, we wouldn't be able to see it fully, just because we don't exist that way. But given the analyses that we've put out there, Dustin, does that, because you were saying how weird it was, and admittedly, it's definitely not the way that we're used to experiencing stories, but how does that change your perception in any kind of way, if it does?
Well, it definitely makes me think that it was a much better movie than I realized, because at first, I mean, I'm like, okay, Adam Sandler, it's gonna be like a weird comedy. He's gonna suck in it. Uh, and then it was totally not at all that. Like there wasn't really even any comedy. At
I mean,
least
there was like
nothing that I would. They were awkward moments, but
yeah.
I would have to say the part where where he said, "Well, this is this stick is unbreakable, and then it breaks."
Oh yeah. Well,
And
there's
he's like, "Oh, that was one of our older models."
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's things like that, or like when if he like trips and falls, he's like that. Move that thing, Lance. It could have hurt someone. It nearly hurt me. That. I mean, there's moments like that, but it's not really like I remember I was watching it with Jill. I wanted her to see that even before I knew that we were gonna do it for the show, but I remember like there were certain moments like that, and she was laughing at those, and partially it's because a lot of what else happens is rather disturbing or anxiety inducing, such that when those little things do happen, they seem a lot funnier than they really are, just because of the comic relief aspect, but also
I got an undercurrent of dread for
oh
most
yeah,
of that.
I
Because
agree.
when he flips out and like smashes up the bathroom, I mean, I've done that before. Like I know what that's
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, I love that whole scene. And one of the things that you'll notice also is when he, let me tell you, the part when he's recounting the whole DJ Justice thing and about confusion or Confucius, that whole thing. I've done that more times than I can remember, like reciting something that I heard that I liked, and trying to use that as an entree to
That's
conversation.
an autistic trait,
Yeah,
totally. My brother
yeah.
does that all the time.
I've done that all the time. And then like when she mentions his family, how like instantly he feels uncomfortable and like instantly he just can't take it.
Right away, he's just like, "Fuck those guys." Like,
Yeah, well, it's like it's like the bad thoughts come back, and I know how that feels as well. Um,
Well, his family wasn't really supportive of him
no, not
in any respect. So
no,
I
well,
mean,
not in any way that was actually helpful. Because like again, the one sister claims to be trying to help him, but I think she was hurting him quite a lot, much more than she could even realize.
like when
she wasn't
uh,
considering like
Emma's
who he
character
was.
when
Hmm.
Emma's character was talking to her after the night he actually spent the night in Hawaii, and she was telling sister, uh, yeah, he never showed up. Yeah, he's kind of retarded, you know, or something to that effect. And she was just kind of, going off on a tangent against him.
Hmm. Any other thoughts about the film in any capacity?
I thought his crazy scheme with the pudding um, was sort of an interesting parallel for like doing something that
Hmm.
effectively goes nowhere, or that nobody else would have
Hmm.
put together.
Well, you know what's funny about that? Well, it does kind of speak to what we were talking about before with like people that are on the autism spectrum are able to often able to um, point out or obsess over or whatever with minute things like that. But it also the
Like
whole
like the
Yep.
man like the man behind A Beautiful Mind.
yeah. Well, there's that, but then there's also there's something called so the whole thing with the pudding actually did happen. It really did happen. There was a guy named David Phillips, and it was an American civil engineer. I'm reading off of Wikipedia. American civil engineer, best known for accumulating many frequent flyer miles by taking advantage of a promotion by Healthy Choice Foods in 1999, and he received 1,250,000 frequent flyer miles.
Why?
And, yeah, and that whole thing with the pudding that really happened.
Is
Nice.
it sounds almost like the Simpsons did a parody of, apparently at some point in the 80s, I think it was McDonald's or whatever had this promotion where for the Olympics, every time America would get a gold medal in something, you would get like free food or whatever. But that
Mhm.
year, like the Soviet Union, like the prize the winning tickets were all in events that the Soviet Union would usually win, and then that was the year that they boycotted the Olympics.
Mhm.
And so basically every ticket was a winner because the US was essentially unopposed.
Uh-huh.
They took like a beating on it. Like they parodied it in The Simpsons. I don't know if it actually happened, but they made some mention of there being a promotion like that. And
Yeah,
every
well,
once in a while, somebody doesn't do the math right.
that's right. And so yeah, that exact thing did in fact happen, which I think is kind of cool.
I
That
find it weird that Healthy Choice would make chocolate pudding. It must have tasted awful.
yeah,
Right.
well,
It
it's
probably tasted exactly like Baker's chocolate.
well, and they were obviously able to clear the licensing for that and for like some of the other logos you see, which isn't necessarily common for certain kinds of movies, which I guess that
Speaking
also speaks to what?
Speaking of pudding, since Sam's Club is actually closing, they used to have this like really cool pudding, like in like cans, uh,
Uh,
like really large cans that was already made, and you'd be able to take it home and just whip it up and put it in whatever the hell you wanted, no, so it's kind of sad that Sam's Club is closing.
the one of the things I think as far as the licensing goes, that's probably the reason why they were able to do that. I'm sure is in large part to the large box office cachet that Adam Sandler still brings to the table. I mean, I know he's switched over to Netflix recently, but the the fact of the matter is that he's been able to make a lot of different kinds of things happen, and on that level. And I felt kind of bad that it didn't do very well financially, at least at the box office at the time. It was very well acclaimed, and it actually got a Criterion Collection Blu-ray release, which I was extremely happy.
Dang.
Well, I was extremely happy about that because
When
it's
did
one
it
of,
get a Criterion, by the
it
way?
was I think it was like last year or the year before, but it was one of my all-time favorite films, and I was so glad that it finally got the treatment it deserves. And it's and Adam Sandler's gone on to do some other dramatic roles, like in Reign Over Me. He was in a movie called Men, Women, and Children, which I have not seen, but I've heard he's been in that. I think it was also Funny People, which I have in my collection. I haven't watched it yet, but it's sort of a comedy
I have
drama.
that one. Isn't it with
Seth
uh
Rogen and Leslie Mann,
yeah,
yeah. And then apparently his best performance ever is in a movie on Netflix now called The Meyerowitz Stories, New and Selected. And apparently he won, or Meyerowitz Stories, sorry. He apparently won a great amount of acclaim for that film. And
what's
I'm very much looking forward to seeing that because after having seen Punch Drunk Love, I was like, I can never hate Adam Sandler now because I know what he's really capable of. I don't always necessarily like what he does, even though I have liked a lot of his comedies, but like, I don't think that his talent is always served as much as it could be. But it's like I've seen what he can do, and he can be really, really good.
Didn't you
I
say
really
Jim
like him in
Carrey has done a movie or did a couple movies like this in his career, not just
Well,
comedies?
yeah, well, he
Yeah.
he did Majestic. He did his best performance ever was in Man on the Moon, which was about a
about Jim
comedian, Andy
Carrey?
Kaufman, but it was a complete chameleonic performance. It's one of the all-time best I've ever seen in terms of acting performances. So yeah, he's definitely done that, and I
I
think
wouldn't mind doing that on one of these times.
Man on
Man
the
on the
Moon.
Moon.
Yeah, that's a great one. I'd love to watch that one.
We could definitely
You forgot to mention that Adam Sandler was in Spanglish
That
also
too. That was another
as a
comedy
dramatic
drama.
role. Yeah,
I,
I liked him in that movie.
I'd like to see that one. I haven't seen that one. And even in a movie like Anger Management, which is for up until like the very third act, it's to me, it's I kind of saw that movie as being like a dark thriller in the clothing of a mainstream comedy because it's really creepy and disturbing for most of it, and it does kind of cheat its way out of it in the end. But I thought he did a good job in that one, and he actually holds his own with Jack Nicholson, which is not easy. Um, that's saying quite a lot. But yeah, I wish that he would do more movies like this. But at the same time, movies like this in general are not common, and we're all probably better off for the fact that they're not so common because when something like this does come out, it's very very special. Any final thoughts?
Not that I know of.
I can't think of anything that wasn't covered.
Yeah,
Like,
I think we covered it all fairly well.
Yeah.
But at any rate,
good work,
we
Dane.
yeah, thank you. Well, it is one of my all-time favorites, so I wasn't gonna miss out on the chance to talk about it. And Jill did watch it with me, and she really liked it herself. She's
Did she mention anything to you that
like to relay back to anybody.
Yeah.
Well, she really liked it. But she for the longest she has a very kind of logical, straightforward brain as far as like she tends to like things explained in the context of the story. So like when things are left unresolved, that bugs her. Or like
was this film left resolved to her unresolved?
It was like, and I kind of explained to her what I explained to everyone just now about my take on it, and she was like, "Oh, okay." But I know that she does tend to like to have certain things. She doesn't really like plot points that are not resolved, as well as let's see what else, as well as the she was having a hard time putting her finger on what exactly. Yeah, well, she was having a hard time putting her finger on exactly what, uh, Adam said, what Barry Egan. And she was like, "There's something wrong with him, babe," and it. Yeah, but she was also seeing it there, but then she was seeing it through a couple different lenses because she was seeing it through the movie just as it was presented. She was seeing it through my eyes because she knew I loved it so much, and then she was also seeing it through kind of her own eyes and kind of seeing it through through Emily Watson's character in that same way. So she saw it on a couple of different levels, and so that's part of why I wanted her on here, but she's asleep at the moment. She had a bad day.
Another thing I was going to say is a lot of times mental issues will coexist. So you could have a couple different mental issues, going on at the same time. So maybe he had a couple things wrong with him, not just one in particular thing,
Which I think that's very true. And if I had to be amateur doctor, I would probably say that's a pretty good guess that he had, because even if you have, say, anxiety and depression, no matter what the variation is, whether it's anxiety, depression, whether it's bipolar, whatever it is, you can have, emotional outbursts, or you can have good days, bad days, whatever. And he wasn't on any kind of vacation or anything. So, like, that's why it can be a little difficult to pin it down without proper medical diagnosis. And, that's, again, if anybody out there is feeling any kind of feelings of any kind that are impeding their lifestyle or their feelings of their own well-being or their interactions with others, please get help. Whether it depends on how serious it is. If you're suicidal, of course, and immediately call a suicide hotline. But if you're just feeling overly sad or having trouble dealing with your emotions, or things of that nature, please do seek help, because if it's left undiagnosed, it can cause a lot of problems. But also, finding the proper treatment plan for you and just ways to deal with it, that will result in much greater happiness in the long run. So yeah, if we don't have anything more to contribute, then we might as well go around the room and give our little spiel at the end. I can start off. I am Dane Kyle, temporary host for Inside Movies Galore, given the fact that David is not feeling very well, but was still able to be involved. I am an independent filmmaker based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and you can connect with me on YouTube, Facebook, anywhere you can find me. I've got a ton of projects in the works and a lot of stuff that's rolling out this year. And, in 2 horror anthology feature films, working on getting my first feature off the ground, doing a fan web series, and another fan film. Just finished a short film, just busy, busy, busy.
Something involving clowns, I think. I don't
That's
know.
right. That's right. Yeah, one of them for clownsploitation.
My Killer Cloud should be here later this week.
Nice, and that's I pre-ordered that Arrow version, the Arrow.
Is that
Blu-ray
releasing this
release.
week?
I think so. Or
Oh
not,
my shit!
or
I didn't
not
even
this week. Next week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There's still time.
But so let's see. So there's that, and I guess Dustin, you might as well go next.
Huh? Oh, I'm Dustin. I go to UWM. Not doing great right now. I have an Instagram where I show off my expansive horror collection, DHR Hunter. I've been putting up some more stuff on there recently, so you can see some of my adventures from C2E2 this past weekend.
Nice.
And I am also, I know I keep threatening it, but pretty soon, I'm going to have at least some movie reviews out. Like, I'm just going to make myself do them when I watch the movies.
Cool.
So those will be available on the Movies Galore blog page.
Nice. Red Raven.
I'm Red Raven, and I'm from Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and I'm a local promoter in the Milwaukee area, and I book shows, and I'm also on Dedger's Dark Coffin Classics.
Awesome.
Nice. And then Katie.
I am Katie Cadaver from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I am a body positive horror artist and alternative model. You can find me at patreon.com/Katie Cadaver or on Instagram at 3RDEYE0PEN. I'm also the makeup artist for horror punk band Ratbat Spider. You can listen to them at ratbatspider.bandcamp.com. And I am also a dead girl for Dedger's Dark Coffin Classics horror TV show. You can watch them at vimeo.com/DDCC. And I'm a performer and producer for Grindhouse Tees Burlesque Productions. You can find all the latest info at facebook.com/Grindhouse Tees. And I will be performing and debuting, actually, my latest horror gorelesque act at Friday the 13th Fest, Part 4, Jason Goes to Bayview.
Nice.
Dedger's Dark Coffin Classics will be there doing 80s horror trivia, and Ratbat Spider and the Dick Satan Trio are playing, and you'll see performances by yours truly and Scully Sati of Tarot Readings by Scully. So, super fun show. Come on out to Frank's Power Plant this Friday the 13th.
Now,
I'll almost certainly be there too.
What did you say about the Freddy Goes to Where?
Jason Goes to Bayview.
Sorry, Jason.
That's what they're naming this
Bayview.
show. Frank's
Sorry.
Power
Get it.
Plant from the Bayview neighborhood of
Yeah,
Milwaukee.
Jason, not Freddy.
Get it right.
Yeah, does Jason get a tan when he's there?
It's
Probably
fucking
not this
cold in
time of year.
Bayview. God damn.
Well, this is speaking from someone who's never been to Wisconsin, obviously. And then David, close us out, please.
And my name is David Streggy. I normally run this podcast, but Dane for taking my place for once and not having me kidnapped by the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for once.
Oh, your time is coming.
Leatherface, get it right.
Damn it. I knew I should have put shaving lotion on before. Anyway.
You should have put the lotion in the basket like I told you.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to go through an airport. Anyways, but I also run Movies Galore Milwaukee, which is a blog site. I haven't been writing lately because I've been sick, but I'll get back on it probably this next week. And so on and so forth. I'm also a small time producer, which I've got some things in the wing with Dane, and
Mhm.
definitely a feature or two down the road. So definitely check those out. Well, one of them is Wrestle Massacre, which I don't know as yet, but might be late fall or late summer that it may come out. So uh, that's still in the wings uh, for coming out eventually. So stay tuned. And next week, we're actually going to have Celeste back on the show. So we're going to do Feed.
Mm.
Stay
Neat.
tuned, folks, for an exciting show. Hopefully, you uh, we we kind of did a romantic. It was kind of an uplifting film. So
I think it was, and it's very inspiring for me because it doesn't ignore the fact that life can be really hard and that you have to go through a lot of difficulty in order to get to the happiness. But once you get there, it makes it all the sweeter. And I think that Charlie Chaplin understood that back in the 30s.
and
And I think that this
I
film
heard you
understands
last
that.
week. I heard you
What?
last
What?
week about. I heard you last week about let's get back to horror films, but uh, I like I like that we expand out into other different films too, because even though I enjoy horror films more, I like going out into the left wing and picking out a either an older film or a newer film or a film that really doesn't have to deal with the horror genre because they're all part of movies.
Absolutely. And especially something like this, which is way out of left field, and yet it encompasses all the various emotions, highs and lows. And I don't know, it's Punch Drunk Love is a kind of film. I have a lot of kinds of films I'd like to make, and Punch Drunk Love really inspired me on a lot of levels.
Well, in any case, folks, stay tuned for an exciting week next week, and hopefully, I'll be back and ready and energized faster and more more entertaining next week. So, in any case, hopefully, everyone has a great evening. To our listeners out there, hopefully, you have enjoyed our discussion on this film.
Nighty
Everyone.
night, everybody.
Good night.
Like, share,
Night.
and subscribe.